friends, here we are again. The last thing I want to be doing, and like one of the last videos I did was also on this general subject of horribleness. But here's the thing, people aren't talking about these abusers in the fashion industry, so I'm just going to do everything I can to signal boost it, even though it is the last thing on this earth I want to be talking about. I want to talk about clothes. I don't want to talk about shitty people, but here we are, we got to do it. So today, we are going to be talking about the horrible actions of yet another predator, that being the photographer Emanuele D'Angelo, who also has the brand LIVINCOOL. But first, I've looked into it, and a very, very small percentage of you are actually subscribed to the channel. It's completely free. Just press that button, and you will not regret it. Thank you so much. So, who is this guy? Well, in my opinion, he's actually kind of a nobody and a grifter, and I'll explain more of why that is in a bit. But he's shot some of the biggest names in the industry, like, Kendall Jenner and Gucci, Louis Vuitton, stuff like that. He's fucking massive as a photographer. And as his star rose as a photographer, he said, I can parlay this into a brand, because everyone's got to have their own brand, right? So that is called LIVINCOOL, and it is so dumb. He sells like basics, which just means boring ass clothes, and then he charges $200 for them and gets his really, really famous friends to pose in them. Like Emily Ratajkowski, I have no idea how to even pronounce her name after all this time, but he has called her his muse, and she poses in the clothes and stuff like that, and people apparently buy them even though it's so fucking boring. But surprise, surprise, it turns out that this guy is a complete and utter asshole, like true criminal in the truest sense of the word, as you'll hear. In this video, I want to say up front, is really a signal boosting of a story that Diet Prada did on their website, so definitely go to dietprada.com and read the whole story and all of these accounts and learn it, from the horse's mouth. So I want to take that story and I want to read you these quotes from these victims who have been abused by Emanuele D'Angelo, because it is harrowing stuff. And after hearing this, I really think you'll understand that we need to get this guy out of the fucking industry. So while Diet Prada really recently blew this up, it actually started again with Shit Model Management, another Instagram account that kind of outs abusers and things like that. So in December, they made a post that said, "I have time today. Who needs exposing?" And a model responded saying that a photographer rubbed his genitals on her and then coerced her to have sex with him during Paris Fashion Week, and several other stories followed that one. So with those tidbits, Diet Prada really took the lead and started doing digging and got people on the record saying what this guy has fucking done to them. So let's hear it from these survivors. First up is Ellie Fox, a very brave model willing to have her real name attached to this story because clearly she believes so strongly that this guy needs to be outed. So she says, "I was told it was a lingerie shoot for Agent Provocateur, not a test shoot, a nude shoot, or a shoot for Emanuele to take photos for his own portfolio." And this, right off the bat, is something that we'll hear over and over and over. He used the lingerie brand Agent Provocateur as a kind of front for his abusive actions, because that is a really high-profile brand. He probably knew that models, they'd be maybe more willing to do more for him if they thought it was for a big brand like that. So right off the bat, just terrible shit, starting off with a horrible lie to coerce people into situations that they wouldn't otherwise be in. I arrived expecting there to be at least a makeup artist and stylist there, but it was just him. Immediately, I was a bit taken aback to be alone with this man. I'd only ever shot on my own with women. One of the looks he gave her was a pair of panties with no top, which, this is a lingerie brand. They don't really do that. They want to show off the lingerie, not show people naked. So she said, "I looked at him confused. He just shrugged and gave me some nipple pasties. I was feeling very vulnerable already at this point." And then he said, "No, the pasties aren't working. Will you take them off?" And he became more demanding at this point. And she had never posed nude to this point, she was saying, so she was trying really not to expose herself. So already she's uncomfortable. She's going beyond her comfort zone, and this guy is pushing her to do things that she is not willing to do. So at this point, Emanuele says he just might as well shoot her topless. Yeah, let's just try it, you know what I mean? But obviously that's what he was going for the entire fucking time. So she says, I thought this was a shoot for Agent Provocateur's social channels. It didn't make sense to me why nipples or nudity would need to be shown, but I complied, covering myself with my arms. And of course, since this dude is an abuser, he's gonna keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it until he can't even push it anymore. So at this point, he asks her to take off her bottoms, her panties as well. This time though, she was unwilling to take that step. He finally hit her absolute limit. But it does not stop there, because at this point, she leaves, he's got his photos, and he decides to go a step further and Photoshop out her panties so that she appears completely nude. This is psychopathic shit. Ellie says, when I saw the photo and how badly Photoshopped it was, I was mortified. I felt like I'd been violated and taken advantage of, along with being coerced to go topless. And then later on, she says, he takes a few photos, but then suddenly starts to grope my bum as he's shooting from behind, telling me how sexy and cute I am. I twisted away, but he was being adamant at this point and started touching my vagina. Oh my god, we are fucking getting deep into this shit now, and it's getting really fucking bad. He grabs my hips and pulls me over to a sofa. I think I remember him asking me to gyrate my hips on him. Next thing I know, his trousers are around his ankles and he's pulling his penis out of his underwear. He pulled me down hard onto his lap, trying to manipulate my hips, and I just froze but made sure I kept my thighs tight together so that he couldn't penetrate or touch me with his penis. So we have gone fully from the point of just a pushy photographer, which is absolutely not cool in any way, shape, or form, to a full-on sexual abuser. So this guy isn't just pushing the limits to get good photos, he is fucking abusing people physically and sexually. I don't know how long I stayed there, but I remember getting up and he made a joke about, oh, it's too soon, I guess. So again, just playing it off as a joke like, I thought we were having fun, too soon, I guess. No, he just abused a woman. Unacceptable, should be in fucking jail. So I know we just started off with a really, really rough one there, but it really gives you a good idea of how awful this guy is. He is very, very powerful in the industry, and he is using that status to do some fucking horrific things. So let's hear from our next survivor, her name being Madeline, and that is a pseudonym. This person chose to stay anonymous, as is fully their right, and this does not make their account any less credible in my eyes. So again, she was told that this was going to be a shoot for the brand Agent Provocateur. She says, he suggested we did some topless shots, which was fine. I'd done lingerie and topless before, and I trusted him. So she had trust in him, and he was going to start abusing it. Eventually, the shoot became fully nude. He'd say things like, this is what Agent Provocateur wants to see. They need to see your sexy side. It started with shots of me on a bed, and then the floor, and eventually I found myself stood up with my legs spread wide. I then clocked the raging boner bursting out of his jeans. There was a big wet patch. He said it was my fault because I was so fucking sexy, and he then took my foot and made me rub his dick with it. I was terrified at this point. Again, it's taken that full-on switch into rape territory. It's the full-on casting couch stereotype, getting people into a situation where they think they are working and progressing their career, but instead they are just there for the whims of a fucking pervert. The photos were becoming more and more pornographic. At one point, he laid on the floor and had me stand over his camera so he could shoot me between the legs, asking me to touch myself. Later on, she agreed to hang out with him one time as friends, and after going to a party together, they ended up at a hotel room together, where she fell asleep after kind of being pressured to sleep with him, and she pushed him away. But she says, when I woke up in the morning, he was grinding against me and suggested that we have sex. I kept saying no and that I had to go. I remember him standing at the end of the bed naked, telling me that I too can get naked as he'd already seen me in the nude. It was aggressive and I dissociated throughout. So this dude is a sexual abuser. He doesn't know the limits. He only thinks of himself. He's so fucking selfish. He keeps pushing the line and pushing the line and pushing the line. And every time he pushes it, he will use that to then push to the next level. So somebody maybe isn't comfortable shooting nude, but then once he gets them nude, he'll say, well, now that I've seen you nude, now that it's fine if we have sex or whatever. It's so fucking gross. Now let's hear from Sophia, which is another pseudonym as she is also remaining anonymous here. Once again, this was set up as a shoot for Agent Provocateur. We're starting to sense a pattern here. When he's going to abuse people, he sets it up as a shoot for a brand that he's not actually doing a shoot for, and one that he can then use, because it's a lingerie company, to get them out of their clothes. So this shoot happened in a hotel room in London, and Sophia says, "At the time I was pretty happy with this, as he was shooting Emily Ratajkowski, and I thought it would be a good step. I show up, there's no hair and makeup, and he has one set of Agent Provocateur lingerie, which he clearly bought for the shoot. There was a friend at the flat and he asked her to leave, however she stayed. But then just a few shots in, he ended the shoot, suggesting they try again another time." So weird setup there. So the next time they try a shoot, he's immediately starting to give her alcohol as soon as she arrives. And she says, "Then he was like, let's just do a quick shoot. It'll be so nice. The light is so good. He forced me to go topless and he rubbed my nipples so my boobs look nice." So see, he's not abusing her. He's not kind of, pushing the boundaries. He's just making sure that she looks the best she can look for her shoot for this lingerie company. I always thought in situations I would be a fighter, but at that moment, it was like my mind went numb. And then I was thinking maybe this is all my fault. I didn't go over there thinking this was a hookup or even a photo shoot. I went over there because I thought we were friends just catching up. Then at this point she gets a phone call from her mom, and then she says, "He pulled me over while I was talking to her and was rubbing his crotch on me," just taking these steps of abuse while she's talking to her own mother, okay? As soon as I got off the phone, he was like, "Look how hard you got me, baby," while making these horrible panting moans and trying to get me to touch his dick. She grabbed her things, told him to fuck off, and got the hell out of there. Thank God, because it could have gone much, much further. I always think if I didn't get a phone call, what would have happened? Would I have had the courage to leave? Would I have been hurt or forced into something else? Since that incident, I've spoken to 3 other girls, all based in London, who have had similar experiences, and none of us ever saw the photos he took. I know he has a secret stash of wank bank pictures of girls he's victimized. So clearly at this point, just as she has figured out, we know there's no client here. He's not taking pictures for Agent Provocateur. He is just getting his rocks off at the expense of these girls, their bodies, and their mental health, and traumatizing them for his own personal, selfish, perverted gains. Now let's talk about Emily. Not Emily Ratajkowski, but Emily Kretzer. This is a model who is using her real name here and coming forward. In this case, Emanuele actually never touched her. She says, "I feel like I'm one of the luckier ones in that sense, but my experience with him haunted me and made me absolutely hate myself for years afterwards. So it was by no means innocent either." So at this point, she's looking to kind of build herself up, so she reached out to him to do a shoot because he was very successful and big in the industry. So she went and bought her own lingerie and makeup and stuff for the shoot, and she says, "I didn't have a lot of Instagram followers, I didn't have an agency at the time, and I wasn't an in-demand model, so I took the shoot incredibly seriously," which is going to make it that much worse when he crushes everything for her. When I arrived at James Goldstein's house on the day of the shoot, I was greeted by a man in a fedora who introduced himself to me as Emanuele. I felt slightly uncomfortable during the entirety of the shoot, but I figured it was just my nerves. So now here's where things get kind of weird in like a being John Malkovich kind of way. So they go out onto the basketball court at the house, and there's another guy there, and he asked to take some photos of her shooting basketball hoops in the lingerie. She says, "After he took his turn at a couple shots, the 2 men looked at each other and started hysterically laughing. I turned beet red. All of a sudden, the man who'd been playing basketball stepped forward and said, 'I'm actually Emanuele. I just thought it would be funny to have my friend pretend to be me and shoot you instead.'" So it's some weird ruse that he's been playing up to this point, and it's really confusing and odd. I immediately started laughing along with him to hide my embarrassment and shame. I had just spent hours and money that I didn't have to shoot in an intimate setting with a man who wasn't a professional photographer and was a stranger who I didn't consent to taking photos of my semi-nude body. At this point, the friend starts putting some moves on Emily here and making it very clear that he's interested in more than a professional photographer relationship. They ask her to dinner, which she turns down, thank God. And she says, Emanuele, clearly bothered, said, well, you're supposed to be my friend's date to dinner. Who's going to keep him company now? Nausea flew up from my stomach into my throat. I wept in my car for a good 15 minutes before driving home. I felt so ashamed, foolish, stupid, and used. What I thought was a professional test shoot really turned out to be a scheme set up by Emanuele to pimp me out to his friend and have a cheap laugh at my expense. Emanuele's vile joke of letting his friend pretend to be him to take intimate photos of me with no intention of helping me or my career was a complete betrayal of my trust, my rights, and a gross violation of my young body. So thank God she has that strength to recognize that this was a gross abuse of her. It's so awful. She was clearly in a very, very vulnerable state, looking to progress her career, and this guy just used that for laughs and sex for his friend. He's not even doing it now for his own kind of perverted ways. He's doing it for his friends as well. Fucking awful. So now let's hear from Ava, another pseudonym, and once again, she was alone on set with Emanuele, just the two of them. The first time he came over and touched me without warning was to pull down the straps on my undergarment, exposing my shoulders more. This seemed to me, at the time, relatively innocent. The next time he came over to remove more of my undergarment without asking. I became tense. My breasts were now exposed. Then he came over and touched me without my consent and took off my whole undergarment. At no point had this been discussed, and at no point was I asked if this was appropriate or comfortable for me to do. I left having convinced myself this was completely normal in the industry and that many models would have done this before me and not made a fuss or been difficult. He'd been calm and friendly throughout the interaction, so I thought I was in the wrong for having felt uncomfortable about the situation. Again, this is a very common thing. Victims want to ask themselves, like, what did I do wrong? They don't want to believe that these people abuse them in this way, and they're searching for any other explanation they can find. But unfortunately, the answer really is, this is a fucking sociopath who used you and abused you, and thank God that she's coming out and letting other people know so that this same fate doesn't befall them. So a few months later, Emanuele approached her again to do another shoot. And unfortunately, models, they sometimes have to take what they're given, even if they're uncomfortable about it. And at this point, she had really tried to convince herself that what had happened was her fault, unfortunately. She thought, maybe this time I would be more in control. I don't recall him once coming over and touching me without my consent. He didn't remove any items of my lingerie himself. The more comfortable I felt, the more I convinced myself it was me making a fuss over nothing the last time. So then he asks her to take her bra off, and she says, I agreed, as this is something that when asked, I was comfortable to consent to. He had given me back control over making that decision. So he's still kind of getting what he wants out of her, but he's building her back up. He's making her feel comfortable, and unfortunately, he's about to break that all back down. He began taking pictures until, without any warning whatsoever and absolutely no motivation from my end, walked over to me, sucked my right nipple for a few seconds, and walked back to where he had been standing. What? That escalated quickly. Jesus. So apparently he says, I'm sorry, I just couldn't help myself. She says, I remember being extremely shocked, but instantly thinking I couldn't let him know that. I had to pretend everything was fine and normal. If I did that, then maybe it would be. So she really, really tried to do everything she could to put this experience on herself and blame herself for it, but thankfully, eventually she came around to the understanding that this had nothing to do with her. This had much more to do with a really, really sick, disgusting man. Finally, let's hear from Alexis Ade. That is her real name. She is a real model. So she ended up meeting him for drinks, and he hadn't actually brought any of the LIVINCOOL merchandise with him, which she thought was weird. She says, he asked if I was okay to go with him to the flat that he was staying in, which was maybe a 2 or 3 minute walk from the pub we were at. So she went, and she said, he started to get a little weird and was like, oh, why don't we sit down? Let's have another drink. And then he started taking his pants off. She says, in my head, I'll get the merch after the one drink and just go home. He sat next to me and started to rub my leg and things like that. It got very strange. And then he started to just take my clothes off, and I didn't know what to do. In those moments, you don't want to believe that someone would rape you or take advantage of you, so I didn't really say anything. She just kind of froze, as is a very, very common reaction. Again, as one of our previous survivors stated, you think you know what you would do in that situation, but really no one does. And whatever anyone does do, it's acceptable. There's an entire range of reactions that people have, and one of them is unfortunately just kind of freezing and hoping the moment passes without further abuse. I remember he started to kiss me and he went down on me. I wasn't making any noise because I was so uncomfortable. Then he tried to have sex with me, but that's when I was like, I can't lay here like a doll and just allow this to happen to me. So I kind of started to fight back. I was like, no, please stop. So she stood up and tried to get away, and he started to try to assert himself. Once I started to put up a fight and say no, I think he was like, okay, I don't really want anyone to fight me or to scream. So I got down off the bed, put on my clothes, and said, I'm going home. And then started the long process of trying to come to terms with what had happened. She said, I struggled with it for a while because it just looked like he didn't care and like he didn't do anything wrong. There was no fear in his eyes. It almost made me feel crazy. Maybe I gave him the wrong idea, but I couldn't figure out how. I blame myself for ever going to the apartment because I felt like he knew the entire time what was going to happen. So that's the last of our first-hand testimonials, and you can see this does have a clear pattern to it. And again, as we've talked about with Alexander Wang, that's one of the biggest things that you look for when you're trying to determine if stories like this are real or not. Of course, I personally tend to lean towards just believing women because there's very, very few reasons for someone to lie about this. But even beyond that, you've got to look for patterns. Are there common things that this guy was doing? If one person's saying, oh, he, drugged me and took me back to an alley and did this or that, and then the other person is saying something completely different, I don't know, something to think about. But in this case, these people, they have very, 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 very common experiences here. This guy is doing pretty much the exact same set of steps to abuse them in every single situation, and that gives them lots and lots of credibility here. So one other interesting thing, we have talked a couple times so far in this video about Emily Ratajkowski, who was his self-described muse. He would go back to her to photograph her again and again. And when all this came out and Diet Prada posted it, she actually responded, which I respect quite a bit, because as we've seen again with Alexander Wang, the friends tend to stay silent on these things, unfortunately. She said, "It's no small feat to share with the world the things that have happened to you in situations where power dynamics are abused. I'm horrified to learn that someone I worked with is guilty of taking advantage of his position and of hurting women. I hope that these women are healing. I hope that the men in positions of power are beginning to recognize their place in the world and facing the consequences of their abuse, and I hope that our industry and culture as a whole changes, and very soon." And that's the kind of thing where I couldn't put it better myself. That is why I'm doing what I'm doing here and telling these stories in full, even though they're really hard to hear, because we need to hear them. We need to understand that this is happening, and we need to collectively say that we're not going to accept it anymore in this industry, because it happens way, way, way too fucking often. And models are often in this industry the lowest of the low and the most primed to be abused. So thank you to all these people who have come forward with these accounts and let us know how dangerous Emanuele D'Angelo actually is. And I hope that people who are still standing by him throw him to the fucking wolves. So thank you guys so much for watching. Take a look at the other video on screen here. Subscribe to my channel. I'm sure, unfortunately, we'll be going over more stuff like this in the future. But even if you're into just regular old clothes, I make tons of videos about those, and they're a lot more fun. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.